I never thought the person who would try to take everything from me would be the one I spent 30 years raising. I was 68 years old, a retired elementary school teacher from Maple Grove, Minnesota. I had my routines, my garden, my Tuesday morning book club with the women from church, and my little beagle, Biscuit, who slept at the foot of my bed every single night. My husband, Gerald, had passed 3 years before, and yes, the house felt quieter without him. But I was not lost. I was not helpless. I was Dorothy Harmon, and I knew exactly who I was. The house on Birchwood Lane had been ours since 1987. Gerald and I had painted every room ourselves, planted the maple tree in the front yard that now stood taller than the roofline, raised 2 children in those hallways. After Gerald passed, my son suggested I might want to downsize. I told him I would think about it. I was still thinking about it, quite happily from my kitchen window every morning over a cup of coffee. My son's name is Michael. He is 41 years old, works in commercial real estate, and married a woman named Brenda 6 years ago. Brenda has sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, and she has always looked at my house the way a person looks at something they believe already belongs to them. For the first year after Gerald passed, Michael called every Sunday. Then it became every other Sunday. Then once a month. I told myself he was busy. People get busy. I understood that. What I did not understand, and what I should have seen coming, was how the calls changed in nature when they did come. Less, "How are you, Mom?" and more, "Have you thought any more about the house, Mom?" Brenda started joining the calls on speaker. She would drop in little comments about the market being strong right now, about how much a house like mine would go for in today's prices, about how the money would set Michael up for something really exciting they had in the works. I did not ask what the exciting thing was. Something told me I did not want to know. Last October, Michael and Brenda drove up from Chicago for what Michael called a family visit. They brought a bottle of wine I did not drink, and a bakery box of cookies I did not touch. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had helped Michael with his 4th grade science project, where Gerald and I had eaten breakfast for 30 years, and they talked to me like I was a patient in a waiting room. Brenda did most of the talking. She said they had been worried about me. The winter months were hard for people living alone. The house was a lot to maintain. What if something happened and no one was there? She said these things gently, the way you say things when you have practiced saying them. Michael sat quietly and nodded. He did not look at me directly. I told them I was fine. I told them I had neighbors, I had friends, I had Biscuit, and I had Gerald's toolbox, which I had learned to use quite competently over the past 3 years. I told them I had no intention of going anywhere. Brenda smiled, the smile of someone who has already made a decision and is only waiting for you to catch up. They stayed the weekend. By Sunday afternoon, Michael had walked through every room of the house twice. I watched him from the hallway, measuring the living room with his eyes, standing at the window in the master bedroom looking out at the backyard. He did not think I noticed. I noticed everything. After they left, I stood in my kitchen for a long time. Then I called my friend Ruth, who has known me since we taught 3rd grade together at Lincoln Elementary, and I told her what I had felt during that visit. Not what had been said, but what had been underneath all of it. Ruth is 71 and not easily alarmed, but she was quiet for a moment before she said, "Dorothy, I think you need to pay attention to this." I was already paying attention. The second visit came in December. This time Michael came alone. He said Brenda was visiting her mother. He sat across from me at that same kitchen table, and he told me that he and Brenda were in some financial difficulty. He said it plainly, and I appreciated that at first. He said they had invested in a project that had not gone the way they planned, and they were stretched, and he needed help. I asked him what kind of help. He said the house. I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had once been afraid of thunderstorms and who I had held in the dark and told that the lightning was just the sky taking photographs. I looked at him and I waited for him to say something that would make this make sense. He said if I sold the house now, in this market, I would walk away with enough to be very comfortable. He had already looked into a senior living community in Evanston, not far from them. "Nice place," he said. "Activities, meals, people my own age." He said he thought it would be good for me. He said Gerald would have wanted me to be taken care of. He should not have said that last part. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I told Michael I needed time to think. He looked relieved. which told me he had expected more resistance. He told me not to wait too long because the market would not stay this way. He hugged me at the door and drove away, and I stood on the porch in the December cold and watched his car until it turned at the end of Birchwood Lane. Then I went inside and I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia Cho, and she has handled my affairs since Gerald was alive. She is 63, small, careful, and she does not waste words. I told her everything, the visits, the comments, the proposal. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dorothy, I am glad you called me before you did anything else." She told me that what Michael was proposing was not necessarily illegal on its face, but that I should be very careful about any documents I was asked to sign. She told me to call her before I signed anything at all. She also told me something that I had not considered, that if I wanted to protect myself, there were steps we could take quietly, ahead of time, that would make certain kinds of pressure much harder to apply. I asked her what those steps were. She told me. I began taking them. In January, Michael called to ask if I had thought more about what we had discussed. I told him I was still considering things. He said he understood, but that the Evanston community had a wait list, and if I was interested, he would need to know soon. I said I appreciated him looking into it for me. I kept my voice warm. I kept my voice the way you keep a room, clean, nothing out of place, nothing that would tell a visitor what had been moved. In February, he and Brenda both came. This time, Brenda had a folder. She set it on my kitchen table between the sugar bowl and the fruit basket, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She said she had done some research. She said there were documents I could sign that would make the transition easier, that would let Michael help manage things on my behalf so I would not have to worry. She mentioned power of attorney. She mentioned the house title. She talked about these things the way you talk about the weather, casually, as if they were already decided. I looked at the folder. I looked at my son, who was looking at the folder and not at me. I picked up the folder and I said that I would read through everything carefully. Brenda's shoulders came down from her ears. Michael exhaled. I saw it, the small release of tension, the relief of people who believe they are very close to getting what they want. I asked if they wanted coffee. I made coffee. We talked about other things. Brenda's sister, a vacation they were planning, a restaurant Michael had tried in Chicago. We talked like a family, or like people performing the idea of a family, and after 2 hours they said goodbye and told me to call if I had any questions about the paperwork. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table with the folder in front of me, and Biscuit put his head in my lap, and I scratched his ears for a long time. Then I called Patricia. I drove to her office the following Thursday. She went through the folder page by page. She told me that what was in front of us was a durable power of attorney document that would give Michael full legal authority over my financial decisions and property, with very limited checks on how that authority could be used. She said the house transfer language was embedded in a secondary document, 4 pages in a section that looked like standard elder care planning boilerplate but was not. She set her pen down on the desk and looked at me. She said, "Dorothy, if you had signed these, you would have had very little legal recourse once the process was in motion." I told her I had not signed them. She said, "I know. That is why we are here." We spent 2 hours that afternoon. When I left Patricia's office, I drove to the bank, the same bank Gerald and I had used for 31 years. I met with a manager whose name was Curtis, a quiet young man with careful handwriting, and I made several changes to my accounts. I moved funds. I adjusted beneficiary designations. I documented everything with Patricia's guidance. I did all of it calmly, without drama, the way you prepare a house for a storm, not in panic, but in the deliberate knowledge that weather is coming. In March, I called Michael and told him I was ready to talk seriously about moving forward. He called me back within the hour. I told him I had some questions about the paperwork, but that I was, overall, open to the idea. I heard something in his voice, brightness, a loosening, and it made my chest ache in a way I had not expected. Even then, even knowing what I knew, I wanted to be wrong about my son. I wanted there to be a version of this where he was just frightened and impulsive and not calculating. I looked at the maple tree in the front yard, Gerald's maple tree, and I breathed through it. Michael said he was glad. He said he knew this was hard for me. He said he would arrange everything. I told him to bring the papers whenever he was ready. He and Brenda came on a Saturday. Brenda brought a new folder, thicker this time, organized with colored tabs. She set it on my kitchen table with the efficiency of someone presenting a business proposal, which I suppose is exactly what it was. Michael sat beside her, and I sat across from them, and Biscuit sat in his dog bed in the corner and watched. Brenda walked me through each tab. She explained what each document was, what it meant, what I was agreeing to. She was professional. She had clearly done this before, or practiced it carefully. I listened. I nodded. I turned the pages when she indicated. When she finished, she placed a pen on top of the stack. I signed where she indicated. Each page, each line. Michael watched me sign. When I reached the last page and put the pen down, Brenda collected the documents with both hands and tapped them on the table into a clean stack and slid them back into the folder. Michael said, "Mom, I think this is really the right decision." I said I hope so. They stayed for dinner. Brenda made a list on her phone of what she thought the house would need before listing: new paint in the front rooms, updated fixtures in the main bathroom. She talked about it openly at my dinner table, over food I had cooked. I served them pot roast and green beans and the dinner rolls Gerald always liked, and I listened to my daughter-in-law plan the renovation of the home I had lived in for 36 years. Michael looked happy, relaxed in a way I had not seen him in a long time. Whatever the financial trouble was, he seemed to believe it was almost over. When they left, he hugged me at the door. A real hug, both arms, the way he used to hug me when he was small. He said, "Thank you, Mom." I stood in the doorway and I watched his car until it turned at the end of Birchwood Lane, just as I had in December. Then I went inside, sat down in Gerald's armchair, and I let myself feel all of it. The grief and the anger and the terrible sadness of knowing that your child is capable of something like this. I let it sit there in the room with me. And then I stood up, washed the dinner dishes, and I called Patricia. She answered on the second ring. I told her it was done. She said she was ready. What Michael and Brenda did not know was that the documents I had signed that evening were not the documents they believed them to be. 3 weeks before, Patricia had prepared a second set of papers that looked nearly identical, same format, same number of pages, same colored tabs, but these documents were different in every way that mattered. The power of attorney I signed was a limited and conditional one that gave Michael a very narrow set of permissions regarding a single account that held a very small amount of money. The property transfer document I signed transferred nothing. It was a document Patricia had drawn up specifically, an acknowledgement of review, and nothing more. It looked to someone moving quickly and not reading carefully, exactly like what they expected. My son and his wife had sat at my kitchen table and watched me sign something they did not read. They had trusted their own confidence more than they trusted the words on the page. That is a mistake that costs people very dearly. 2 weeks later, Michael called to say he had arranged a meeting with the real estate agent. He was ready to move forward with the listing. He asked if I had scheduled a date to tour the Evanston facility. I told him I thought we should talk in person. He came alone, a Tuesday afternoon in April. He sat in the living room and I brought him coffee, and I sat across from him and I told him that I had spoken with Patricia. I watched his face as I said her name. Something moved behind his eyes. I told him that the documents he had taken home were not what he thought they were. I told him what they actually were. I told him about the accounts, about the changes I had made in February, about everything Patricia and I had done quietly while he and Brenda planned their next steps. He did not speak for a long time. When he did, he said he did not understand. He said he thought I had agreed. He said I had signed everything. I told him that agreeing and signing are not the same thing. I told him that a signature on a document means exactly what the document says, no more and no less, and that I would encourage him to read more carefully in the future. I told him what Patricia had advised me regarding our legal options. I told him that she had documented everything, including the original documents Brenda had brought to my table in March, which I had photographed before returning them, and which represented an attempt to obtain property under false pretenses in a way that carried serious legal weight. I told him that I did not want to use that documentation. I told him I did not want to see my son in a courtroom. I told him that I loved him, that I had loved him since before he was born, and that I would love him when I was in the ground, and that none of that had anything to do with what he had tried to do to me. I told him that Brenda should also understand clearly what the documentation showed about her role. He was very pale. He put his coffee cup down on the side table and he looked at his hands. I gave him time. I did not rush any of it. He said he was sorry. He said things had gotten out of hand and he had convinced himself it was the right thing. He said the word desperate more than once. He said Brenda had pushed for it and he had led her, and he heard himself saying that, and I think he heard how it sounded. I told him that I believed he was sorry. I also told him that sorry does not rebuild what this had broken, and that the rebuilding, if it was ever going to happen, was entirely his responsibility to begin. He left that afternoon without finishing his coffee. I stood at the window and I watched him go. The house on Birchwood Lane is still mine. The maple tree in the front yard has new leaves on it now, that bright yellow-green of early spring that Gerald always said was the best color in the world. Biscuit is asleep on the porch in a square of sunlight. Ruth is coming Thursday for book club. I have since had a conversation with my daughter, who lives in Portland and who wept on the phone and told me she had no idea and that she was so angry she could not see straight. My daughter is a different person from her brother, and I want to be fair to that difference. I have spoken to Patricia about updating my estate documents in a way that is thorough and clear and leaves very little room for future confusion. That conversation was straightforward, and I felt better after it than I had felt in months. Michael has called twice. Short calls, cautious. I have answered both times. I do not know yet what shape that relationship will take from here. Some things break in ways that change the shape of what is rebuilt, even when the rebuilding is genuine. I am 68 years old, and I do not have the energy to pretend otherwise. What I do have is this house, and this garden, and my book club, and Ruth, and my beagle who loves me with no conditions whatsoever. I have the maple tree Gerald planted and the kitchen table we bought together at an estate sale in 1991 and the quilt on my bed that my mother made with her own hands. I have everything that was always mine. I have my name, Dorothy Harmon, and I know exactly who I am. Nobody is taking any of it. Not without reading the paperwork first.